What seemed especially odd was that Matt wouldn't facilitate with his mother.
At that point, I was frantically trying to communicate with him at home. You know, I'm saying, gosh, if he's talking to these people, why isn't he talking to his mom? You know, he and I have been best friends, bosom buddies. I mean, I'm his life and he's mine, you know. Surely we can be able to communicate. And absolutely got nothing. As a matter of fact, he would take his board and bring it and put it in his bag, put it in his closet and say, finished.
While the Girardis got on with their life, reconciled that FC didn't work, at least for them, Matthew's school continued using it enthusiastically. One day at school, Matthew and his facilitator, special education teacher Susan Rand, had a conversation. But it wasn't about Shakespeare. Later that day, Susan Rand wrote down the conversation and reported it to the authorities.
She handed me a piece of paper, actually 2 pieces of paper, and said, these are the things that he said. And I just scanned through the paper, and I was just in shock of some of the language that was on the paper. And I said, it's impossible. It's absolutely impossible. And it was at that point she made it very clear to me that this was real. It was real, that they had a warrant from my husband's arrest. And they were going to send Matthew to the hospital for an exam. They were telling me that Matthew may have to go to a home, and a foster home. And I told him, I said, there's no way he's going to go to a foster home. I said, he hasn't been anywhere else except our home. There's no way he's going to go to a foster home. And I was told that I may have no choice in the matter. There may be no choice. And it was at that point that I realized I had no control.
Jerry Girardi, a pharmacist at the Veterans Hospital, was working late that day and knew nothing of this until he arrived home.
I got home about 9:30. I pulled into my driveway, and Kathy came rushing down the driveway and started to talk to me. She immediately told me not to go into the house, that there was a warrant out for my arrest, that allegations were made that I had sexually abused Matthew, and I was not allowed near Matthew, nor was I allowed to go into the house.
Forced out of his home, Jerry Girardi spent the next 6 months living at a friend's house, his family life destroyed because of the letters on the board. Despite the fact that there was no other evidence of abuse, the school, the social services, and the police all believed that the words had come from Matthew. Yet Jerry Girardi protested complete innocence.
I told Kathy, there's got to be something wrong. It has to be happening someplace else. We have to call up the Autism Society in Washington and find out if they had any literature on facilitated communications and allegations of sexual abuse. When she called them up, they immediately sent us materials. And in these materials, it showed it was happening all over the country.
There were cases in California, in Texas, in Georgia, in Indiana, in Oklahoma, in New York. The accused included parents, teachers, care workers. Some, like Jerry Girardi, had been forced to leave home. Some ended up in jail. Some parents had their children taken away. This is what happened last January to a family in southern Maine. Betsy Wheaton, a 17-year-old autistic girl, began using FC at school in 1992. One day, using a letterboard, Betsy and her facilitator wrote that everybody in her family, her father, mother, grandparents, and brother, were sexually abusing her. Betsy and her brother were immediately put in foster care while the case was investigated. The court appointed a local attorney, Phil Worden, as Betsy's legal guardian. Worden realized that this was more difficult than the usual abuse case. Before considering whether the allegations were true, the court had to decide a more fundamental question. Was Betsy the author of the allegations, or had they come from her facilitator?
I was most worried in my heart about were we going to do justice in this case. If the communications were real and she was being abused, the idea that on a legal technicality we might send the children back would be just absolutely horrible. On the other hand, if these were not real communications, the idea that all this would happen to these family and these children on a bogus idea was also unacceptable. So to my mind, the stakes were extremely high on both sides, and it was very important that we reach a quality decision based on the truth. And so what I was looking for was a clean, simple, and fairly quick way to just solve that one narrow question. Were these communications coming from the children?
All the parties agreed to invite an expert in communication to come and assess Betsy. They chose Dr. Howard Shane from the Boston Children's Hospital.
Must be Dr. Shane. How are you? Nice to meet you.
Okay, folks, what I'm going to be doing now...
Shane had devised a double-blind test like this to objectively determine who was authoring the messages, Betsy or the facilitator who transcribed the allegations. He showed both a series of pictures and asked them to type what they saw.
Betsy, sure you're looking at it.
When both Betsy and her facilitator saw a picture of a key, the letters K-E-Y were typed. But Shane wanted to discover what happened if each saw a different picture.
Okay.
When Betsy saw a cup, she didn't type cup, she typed hat, what the facilitator saw.
Here we go. Now take a look at this one. I want you to tell me what you see. Okay?
When Betsy was shown a picture of a dog, she didn't type dog, but sneakers, what the facilitator saw.
Okay. Okay. I'll take a look at that one.
When Betsy was shown a boat,
Now you,
she didn't
Betsy,
type
you take a
boat,
look at that one.
but sandwich, what the facilitator saw.
Okay, here's the next one.
It was just devastating to watch because what you saw was the words being typed out were the words the facilitator had seen. And it was just so clear and so unmistakable. I was sitting there watching this and saying, my God, it's really true. This stuff is bogus.
What I found was that whenever the pictures were different, I always received the typed message that was seen by the facilitator. So that was pretty strong evidence that not only was Betsy not communicating, but the messages were being absolutely, totally directed and authored by the facilitator. Come on, Betsy.
Shane then tried a message passing test. He took Betsy out into the corridor and showed her an object out of sight of her facilitator.
Come on. Betsy, now I'm going to show you something. Take a look at this. You take this. Now, what is that? Give it back to me. We're going to back in. I want you to tell everybody what I showed you. When we went back into the room, she was unable to type the word key. I then took another key out of my pocket and said, with the facilitator present, what is this? And she immediately typed key. So again, it suggests that when the facilitator is aware of the information, we get the answer. But when the facilitator is unaware of the information, we don't get an answer.
The only logical conclusion of the test was that the terrible accusations had been authored not by Betsy, but by her facilitator. The Wheatons are now reunited. The facilitator, devastated by the test results, stopped using facilitated communication and persuaded Betsy's school to stop using it as well. After using FC for over a year, the OD Heck Center in Schenectady began discussing whether they should do their own test of facilitated communication.
My first reaction was, why would we ever want to test it? It's working. There were things that individuals who typed with me typed that I didn't remember consciously being aware of. So I thought, well, that's proof enough. Why should we need to test these people? It's their communication. All right, find the one that's the same. Let's put it right in front of you. But just in thinking about it, I wanted the research to be done because I thought it would prove once and for all, without a doubt, that it was these people communicating and that we were not influencing them in any way, shape, or form. I was convinced that it would prove their communication.